Hello, class. So today we are going to be going over chapter 13, delivery. We're going to discuss what is good delivery, methods of delivery, the speaker's voice, the speaker's body, practicing delivery, and then the Q&A session of some speeches. So I want you to think about if you memorized one of Stephen Colbert's monologues word for word and then recited it to your friends, do you think you would have that same response that he does? No, because he has lots of years of experience in his delivery that he makes it his own with the manner of delivery. So that's his vocal inflections, how he has perfectly timed pauses, his facial expressions, and his gestures. So, this is to show how important delivery is to a speech. It can make a mediocre speech more effective, but on the other hand, you can have an excellent written speech ruined by poor delivery. So, overall, what you want to think about is you cannot make a good speech without having to say something, but just having to say something is not enough. You also need to know how to say it, how to deliver it. So, speech delivery is more about your nonverbal communication. It's based on how you use your voice and body to convey the message expressed by your words. Nonverbal communication, that's communication that's based on your voice and your body, once again, rather than using your words. There is a lot of research out there that shows the impact of a speaker's words powerfully influenced by their nonverbal communication. And we'll learn how to use nonverbal communication to deliver your speeches effectively and to increase the impact of your verbal message. So, body language, what does this mean? Wendell Phillips was a leader in the movement to abolish slavery in the US during the 1800s. Some people considered him the greatest speaker of his time. And so let's look at this story about him. So, shortly after the Civil War, an Andover student learned that Phillips was going to lecture in Boston. So, he walked 22 miles to go hear him speak. At first, when he was walking, he was really excited, but then he learned that Phillips was not an orator as we normally think. He was more of a conversational style speaker. So the speaker stood there on the platform, one hand lightly resting on the table, and he talked for what this student seemed like 20 minutes. Then he concluded his speech and sat down. When the student looked at his watch, he realized that he had actually been listening for over an hour and a half, not 20 minutes. So that shows what great a speaker he was, the delivery that he had, that people who were listening, his audience, time went by so fast because they were so fixated on what he was saying and how he was saying it. So you can see good delivery isn't about calling attention to yourself. It's about conveying your ideas clearly, interestingly, but without distracting your audience. Audiences want a combination of formality with the best parts of conversation directness, spontaneity, animation, vocal and facial expressiveness, and a lively sense of communication. So speech delivery is more of an art, it's not a science. What works for one person might not work for another. So you really want to think about that. Also, what works for one audience, remember audiences are always changing. It's made up by different demographics. So what works for one might not work for another. But with practice, you can find yourself able to control your timing, rhythm, the momentum of your speech, just as skillfully as a conductor controls an orchestra. So let's talk about the methods of delivery. There's reading verbatim from manuscript, reciting from memory, speaking impromptu, and then speaking extemporaneously. Reading verbatim from text, that's really manuscript reading. It's a speech that is fully written out word for word, and then the speaker basically is just reading it to the audience. The problem with this method is it really comes across very wooden or artificial because it's really them reading to the listeners, not actually talking with them. Reciting from memory, this is only recommended if you have short speeches like a toast, congratulatory remarks, acceptance speeches, introductions, and others like such. If you are giving a speech this kind, be sure to memorize it so thoroughly that you're not having to focus on what you're going to say next. Because with this, if you're memorizing, then you're more focused on the words than you are actually able to focus on communicating to the audience. Sometimes when speakers recite from memory, they'll stop and kind of gaze, trying to remember where they're at, or look out the window, and that really can be more distracting than anything, and it can come off pretty bad for their speech. So you really want to try avoid using this delivery method for longer speeches. Speaking impromptu, that's really not up to you. It's not in your control. Usually it's when somebody calls on you. So it's a speech delivered with little or basically no preparation. It takes places in situations that you're called out, suddenly. So you really want to avoid this if possible. But if it ever happens to you, just take a minute or two, try to formulate your thoughts in the way an outline would be. Try to think about what your main point is going to be, your supporting point, and then how you're going to be summarizing it. Extemporaneous speech. This is the one that we will be using for this class. This is the most recommended method. So this is a very carefully prepared and rehearsed speech. So it's written out, but you rehearse it. You're not memorizing it because you're rehearsing more of not word for word, but the main points, your supporting details, your transitions. Remember, you're going to have a speaking outline, and that's all you're using to jog your memory on what's the next point. But you're really talking and making those words in the present. So the notes that you use is just to jog your memory. It's very brief set of notes that you use. So the exact wording is chosen at the moment of delivery. The advantages of this method is it gives you more control over the thought and language that you're using. It offers spontaneity and directness. You're able to adapt more with this method. If you've memorized something you're reading from a script, you really can't change it at the moment. But let's say something happens or you notice, something different about your audience that you're needing to adapt or tweak it, you can do it because you're not memorizing it. What you have memorized are just the main points, but not every word, word for word. And it encourages a more conversational quality that audiences like because it's not memorized. So the conversational quality is important, presenting the speech so it sounds spontaneous, even though technically with the extemporaneous speech, you could have rehearsed it, a million times, but it doesn't come out that way. It comes out very natural because once again, it's not memorized. It's more the main points that you know your material or the content by heart. And this is the method that most experienced speakers prefer. So that should tell you something. So again, in summary, the different types of delivery methods is manuscript. That's when you're reading word for word. Memory, that's when you're memorizing it and reciting it word for word. Impromptu, it's just spontaneous on the spot. And extemporaneous, that's where it's very prepared and rehearsed, but conversational because you are delivering those words on the spot. The speaker's voice. So this is important for you to know all the different options that you have with your voice. You have your volume, that's the loudness or the softness. If you speak too loudly, listeners might think you're being boorish. Too softly, they might not be able to understand you or they might come off as shy or meek. But you adjust your voice to the acoustics of the room too. So if you have a really large room, depending if you have like a microphone or not available, you're going to be able to speak up and try to go over maybe some background noise. Then you have the pitch. That's the high or lowness of the speaker's voice. So changes in pitch are known as inflections. Inflections can make the difference between the usage of the same word. For example, aha, I found it, or aha, that's what you were referring to. You notice one pitch is higher than the other, and that can change how you're using the word. So use pitch differently. Try to include it in your speech so that way your speeches don't come out sounding flat. People who use no variation in inflections are said to sound monotone. meaning they use a constant pitch or tone of voice throughout the whole speech. This can come off really boring. So a good example of this, I don't know if you have ever watched Peanuts, that really classic cartoon where the teacher, anytime she's talk, is just like a wah, 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 wah. So that's basically, what it's saying. You want variation, or if not, it's just going to come out very boring. And I hope that's not what I sound like in these lectures. Then you have the rate. That's the speed at which a person speaks. The best rate of speech really depends on a few different things. The vocal attributes of the actual speaker, you, the mood that they're trying to create. So if you're talking about something very somber or serious, usually you're going to slow it down a bit. If you're, talking about something trying to get them hyped up, or if you're starting with like a story or a narrative, it might be a little bit faster. It also depends on the composition of the audience, who they are, and the nature of the occasion. You want to avoid speaking too slowly or too quickly. Sometimes it is something hard to control for a few reasons. If you're nervous, that's just something we tend to do naturally. So you just want to really rehearse your speech. That way you practice on the rate. Also, some people are just naturally fast speakers. So if you know that you're one of those people who fall in that category, once again, rehearse your speech, try to control the rate. Don't go too fast or too slow. Pauses. So this is a momentary break in the vocal delivery of a speech. Pauses are good to use when you are ending a thought or an idea, when you want some time for that idea to sink in, so in between the next points, or also if you're trying to land a very dramatic, impactful statement. If you say something that you really want more drama, I guess, or impact to it, then you give a quick pause or short pause before you move on. So overall, this is vocal variety. It's changes in the speaker's rate, pitch, and volume. And that gives the speech more expressiveness. It is said that vocal variety is the spice of public speaking. You need that variety. You don't want to, sound boring. So just like in life, variety is good and it's important. You want variety in your speech. It's important. So a flat, unchanging voice is deadly to speech making. Pronunciation. This is the accepted standard of sound and rhythm for words in a given language. So you want to practice your speech in front of as many trusted friends and relatives, so that way they can point out if you are mispronouncing any words. If you have any doubts about the proper pronunciation of a certain word, be sure to check a dictionary. Try to practice that word over and over. Maybe do a phonetic spelling note on your speech. But if you notice that you're still having difficulties, that the likelihood of you mispronouncing it in your speech is going to happen, then do away with that word. Try to find a synonym or something that you could replace it with that is easier for you to pronounce. Then you have articulation. That's the physical production of particular speech sound. So that's the actual sound that's coming out, how you would articulate a specific word. So it's not the same as pronunciation. Articulation is forming particular speech sounds crisply and distinctly. So here's an example or a few examples of articulation errors. So the first one is correct, ought to, and an articulation error would be oughta. Didn't, correct way, didn't, incorrect. Don't know, correct, don't know, incorrect. So you get the point. You want to make sure that you are articulating those words fully and correctly. So the speaker's body, your posture, your facial expressions, gestures, eye contact, all affect the way that the listeners are going to respond to you. It's important to be aware of how you are using these, or the fact that you're not using these and other body motions to communicate your message. Personal appearance. Studies have confirmed that personal appearance plays an important role in speech making. Listeners always see you before they hear you. So just as you adapt your language to the audience and the occasion, You should also dress and groom appropriately for your speech. You should always try to evoke a favorable first impression. So, once again, depending on the occasion, just make sure that the way you're dressing matches that occasion. You wouldn't be a guest speaker or the valedictorian. You'd probably be wearing a cap and gown, but let's just say guest speaker at a graduation wearing flip flops, khaki pants, and a Hawaiian shirt. But you wouldn't go to something that's a lot less formal, maybe wearing a tuxedo. So just make sure that what you're dressing with is not distracting from you. It's not taking away your credibility, where people are more focused on what you're wearing and how you look with that versus what you're going to be saying. Movement. So as you speak, try to appear calm, poised, and confident. Don't lean on things, don't be too relaxed where, if you are doing a speech, you're supposed to be a little bit more eloquent and formal. So like if you're just leaning on the podium or something, that's not really going to be the best thing. Don't rush into your speech. We've talked about this, as soon as you go up there, take a moment, smile, examine or look around the audience, and then begin. Avoid pacing back and forth too much. So it's one of those happy mediums. You don't want to just stand there and look stiff. You want to, walk a little bit depending on how big that stage is, how much room you have. You want to, be able to approach one part of the audience, maybe look at the other, take a few steps, but you want to avoid the pacing back and forth where it's more about like a nervous tick type. Shifting body weight, that's another nervous tick. If you just kind of keep on leaning from one leg to another, um, more often, more quickly than natural. Fidgeting with notes, this is something I really encourage not to use notes, because if you are fidgeting with notes, then you might mix them up, and then you even lose your place. So it's better just to have an outline, and you're less likely to fidget with the outline. Jingling things in your pocket. You want to try to avoid that. Sometimes, um, as a natural thing, you always, also stick your hands in your pocket when you're talking, kind of rock back and forth. So don't turn into a statue. It's kind of like, don't move too much. Don't stand still. Just try to find a happy medium. Try to have expression. Don't be expressionless. Gestures. So motions of a speaker's hands and arms during the speech. Whatever gestures you're making, it shouldn't distract your message or from your message. They should appear natural and spontaneous. Be helpful in clarifying and reinforcing your ideas, and be suited to the audience and occasion. So you might say, well, how are gestures going to be clarifying and reinforcing my ideas? It's something that you do naturally when you're conversing, having a conversation with your friends or something. When you're talking, you use your hands. You might say, and then this happened, and the other, and one. Um, so just make sure that what your hands are saying, it's actually being used to clarify or go along with what you're verbally saying. So think about communicating with your listeners, and your gestures will just naturally happen, by themselves as they do in conversation. As long as you're more focused in what your message is and saying that message, the rest will come naturally. Eye contact. So eyes have been called the windows of the soul. We look to them to help gauge a speaker's truthfulness, intelligence, and feelings. One of the quickest way to establish a communicative bond with your listeners is to look at them personally and pleasantly. Really, depending on the audience, you might have too many people that you can't actually look at everybody, but just make sure that when you're speaking, you are directing that eye contact towards the different areas of your audience. How you look at them also counts. You want to try to establish contact, once again, with your whole audience, not one section. Um, so no matter the size of your audience, though, you want your eyes to convey confidence, sincerity, and conviction. Practice delivering your speech. Go through your preparation outline out loud to check how you have written, what it sounds like in spoken words. I think I've stated this in another lecture. It might look really good when you're writing it, But whenever you actually say it out loud, sometimes those things just don't have that right flow. That way, when you practice before you actually present, you have time to adjust and try to find, what can I do? Where can I change it to have a better flow? Prepare your speaking outline, practice your speech out loud several times using only the outline. Begin to polish and refine your delivery and give your speech a dress rehearsal when possible, especially if it's going to be something more of speeches you'll be doing in class. So you want to try to dress the way you would dress. Just get everything as close as possible to the real thing. It's like a practice session of your actual speech. And answering audience questions. Some speeches will lend to this, some might not, but just in case, let's go ahead and go over this. So you want to formulate answers to possible questions that you think people might ask. Naturally, when you have your speech, there's a few things that you can come up with that you're like, well, there's a probability that people are going to ask X, Y, and Z. So let me go ahead and already have some answers prepared for that. You can also ask your friends and family, hey, let me tell you about my speech. What questions would you have? And that just gives you more answers that you already have ready. You want to practice delivering those answers. You also want to approach questions with a positive attitude. So don't be defensive when you're answering. Even if the person asking is asking a hostile question, just keep your cool, be professional. You want to listen carefully. If you're faced with an unclear question, try to rephrase it and ask. So you're asking it back to them, but rephrasing it and see if you are understanding the question correctly. If not, you can also ask them to repeat or rephrase the questions themselves. Direct the answers not only to the person who asked the question, but to the entire audience. And be honest and straightforward. If you don't know the answer, it's okay to not know. Don't apologize. Don't evade the question or bluff. It's okay to not know everything about that matter or that subject. You can always say you'll get back to them and ask them to meet you after class so that way you can get their information to follow up with them about that question. And just try to stay on track. Don't get diverted or lose control of time with the question and answer session. So, in summary, I think the main thing you want to think about is what makes a speech effective? Where does that effectiveness comes from? Well, it's really half and half. Half of it is the content, what you have to say. And the other half is the delivery, how you say it. So you can have really great content, but if that delivery just isn't there, that speech can be a flop. Or you can have okay content, but really great execution in your delivery, and that speech would be amazing. So just remember when you have a speech, focus on what you're saying, your main ideas, that they are all logical and organized, they have supporting material, you have good organization, you have good content, but make sure that you also practice and rehearse. That way you have really great time that you've invested in your content and in your delivery. So the probability of your speech being very effective and impactful is going to be very high. So that is chapter 13, and I hope it was helpful.